We ended the last part of this introductory lecture with the idea that controlling nature may not be such a great idea. The massive use and massive misuse and improper disposal of countless types of chemicals was now threatening, or was now seen to be threatening, both the environment and human health. And this was a revolution in the way mankind viewed nature. This is the Cuyahoga River in Ohio. Now, this river would regularly catch on fire. It was lined with factories and industrial sites. They would pump out their waste products into the river. A lot of the waste products were petrochemicals, petroleum, gasoline, diesel fuel are all petrochemicals, but these weren't gasoline and diesel fuels and other useful petrochemicals, but waste petrochemicals that were flammable. And every so often, the river would catch on fire. The Cuyahoga River fire of 1969 was not even a large river fire by the standards of the neighborhood. But it was the one that was captured on film. It was the one that was broadcast on the TV news to millions of Americans. It was the one that got a lot of people thinking, rivers are not supposed to catch on fire. Water is not supposed to burn. And yet here is a river burning. The shock to the United States, the collective understanding of the United States, cannot be overstated. The other thing that was happening in terms of environmental health at the time was Los Angeles smog. If you're familiar with the geography of Los Angeles, you'll know it is surrounded by mountains. There are what's called a temperature inversions. Result, the air kind of just gets trapped in a warm air, gets trapped at the bottom of the atmosphere by cold air on top. Normally, warm air rises, but the temperature is inverted. The warm air is now at the surface. And this warm air is full of automobile exhaust. It's full of ozone. We'll talk more about ozone later in the semester. When ozone is up in the ozone layer, it's great. We want it there, beautiful. But when ozone is down near the surface and people can breathe it in, it is a very serious insult to our respiratory systems. Now, Los Angeles, of course, was the home of the movie industry. This was the home of Hollywood. This was the place where people with lots of cameras were living. And the smog in Los Angeles, the health problems it created, were very well documented and became something of an embarrassment for the city and a wake-up call for the entire nation. After the implementation of air pollution control laws, the air of Los Angeles, as shown in this 2005 photograph, is much cleaner. Not perfect, but certainly much better than it was in the late 1960s. And so, faced with the pressure of rivers that caught on fire, of major cities that were choking under automobile exhaust, President Richard Nixon established the United States Environmental Protection Agency in 1970. And the Environmental Protection Agency would be responsible for administering the environmental laws that were passed during this time as well. The Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act are the two big ones, although there were a number of other ones that were passed at this time. If you think about the insults that the environment was suffering at the time, rivers catching on fire, smog and smoke and pollution, air pollution in the largest cities, the government was forced to do something. The Clean Water Act was passed in 1972, the Clean Air Act in 1970, the Endangered Species Act in 1973, and the National Environmental Policy Act in 1970. You may not have heard of NEPA, but you've probably heard of an environmental impact statement. And in 1970, any federal agency that was going to build something or take some action was now required to evaluate the environmental impact of that action. These laws form the basis of much of the environmental policy that we're going to be talking about later on in the semester. Now, during the 1970s, we discovered that ozone was being destroyed by chlorofluorocarbons, particularly Freon refrigerants. Now, what is a chlorofluorocarbon? It's a carbon atom onto which is attached chlorine atoms and fluorine atoms. They are a halogen or halogenated organic material. Now, these are very useful compounds. If you ski, you have fluorinated wax on the base of your skis, but when they're gases, like refrigerants, and when these refrigerants are released into the atmosphere, the chlorofluorocarbons, which are extremely stable molecules, rise up into the stratosphere where they interact with ozone, destroying ozone, allowing ultraviolet light to reach the surface of the earth and increasing everyone's risk of skin cancer. So in 1989, in the 1980s, several nations, over 130 nations, signed the Montreal Protocol, which called for the world's industrialized economies to phase out the production and use of chlorinated or fluorinated refrigerants. You can see on this chart that use of these, production of these compounds was expected to increase and be as high as 14 or 12 or 13 parts per billion in the stratosphere by 2030. Here we are, 2015. The ability of these compounds to react with ozone and destroy ozone created a serious public health threat. And the production and the signing of the Montreal Protocol has resulted in the dramatic reduction of these materials in the stratosphere and this protection of the ozone layer and the prevention of skin cancer. The Montreal Protocols are extremely important because, unlike the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act, and NEPA, this law or this international treaty applied to over 130 nations. It was the first time that just about everyone could agree on an environmental law designed to protect the environment and human health. The Montreal Protocols would lay the groundwork for other international environmental agreements, including the current talks on the reduction of greenhouse gases.